Now, all of the advice that Google gives me is going to be promptly ignored. And here we go. All right, so thanks for having me, and welcome to not another talk about testing. So there have been plenty of talks about testing. I'm going to add to the pile. Who am I? Don't introduce yourself first. I'm John. I'm a web developer, programmer. First learned programming in Fortran 90. I'm not old enough to be working in Fortran 90. Entered the tech industry in 2011, sort of worked in automotive diagnostics for a while, IT managed services, and then eventually I moved into web development with PHP and JavaScript. So I am now a contract PHP and JavaScript developer, and I've been working as a contractor for coming on for 10 years now, counting up a score of 15 commercial projects. And this is relevant. So what can I tell you about testing? So first of all, I'm just going to come up with a definition here. I'm not talking about QA, I'm talking about developer-written, in-code-based automated tests, so unit tests, feature tests, end-to-end or integration tests, and to a lesser extent, static analysis. And what can I tell you about testing? Well, what's new in testing? Well, not much. I could tell you why you should be writing tests, but you've probably heard it all before. I could tell you how to write a test, but the internet is just full of information like that. There's all kinds of resources, and they could tell you that a lot better than I can. Speaking of resources, Laracast has an entire category dedicated to testing. So for anyone who was hoping that I would tell you how to do tests, there's a great resource. Most modern frameworks, they're full of tools for doing testing, so the documentation will guide you there. So that's what I'm not going to talk about. What I am going to talk about is the trends that I've seen in the projects I've worked on. Now, okay, fair enough. Let me give you some figures. My sample set isn't huge, but this is what I've got to work on. So of the projects I've worked on, only 40% of all the projects I've worked on had any tests at all. Now, I'd like to say that by the time I finished working on them, they were fully test covered and everything was great. But we'll come on to why that doesn't happen shortly. So of the greenfield projects I've worked on, only 25% were teams who actually prioritized testing. So when you're working within a team, if they're prioritizing testing, great, it'll get done. But again, I'll tell you why shortly, but that doesn't always happen. And then of the established products I worked on, so we've got products sort of been through their growth phase, they're out and established, lots of users working on it. Only 16% of those had any working tests at all. So starting to see that, you know, in these commercial projects and products, there's a bit of a lack of testing. If you compare that to most open source projects that you look at, if you go into GitHub and look at a lot of open source libraries, that they're generally really well tested. And I think that it's coming down to commercial motivations. So just a little explanation. Why is this happening? Is it my fault? Well, ultimately, yes. I am the developer, and developers are responsible for writing tests. So if I'm working on a product, I really should be writing tests. But you come up against some commercial issues. You come across quite a few blockers when it comes to actually spending the time writing the tests. So I'm going to do a really ropey cost-benefit analysis here. So for anyone who is a commercial manager, you might want to look away now. What is the cost of testing? Ultimately, it's time. Testing takes time. We talk about things like test-driven development and saying that if you get test-driven development right, that it actually speeds up your development process. But I would say for a large percentage of us, certainly for me, adding tests adds time. We'll talk about getting better at writing tests and bringing that time down in a moment. The primary benefit of testing is the number of bugs it prevents from reaching production. This can be really difficult to measure. It's incredibly difficult to measure the absence of something. So how do you know how many bugs you've prevented from reaching production? You could ask how many bugs have your tests picked up in their test runs. But you know, again, if you're test driving your development, you're writing tests and you're expecting them to pick up bugs and raise failures in the beginning. So it's really difficult to measure the actual primary benefit of testing. Secondary benefit is improvements to the quality, the readability and maintainability of the code. That's always great for yourself as a developer when you come back to it later, but not necessarily, again, a measurable commercial benefit. And a tertiary benefit is the confidence in making changes in future development. So again, I'm sort of kind of trying to write the picture here that testing is a long-term investment, and in a lot of cases, the commercial motivations are really kind of focused on the short-term benefit. So if we put this into the context of any given project at the various stages of their life cycle, we think about an MVP. So if you were on a greenfield project, there's nothing out there yet, there are no users on the system, there's no revenue coming in, you're working on a finite budget, and time comes directly out of that budget. So if you run out of time or run out of money, these overruns can risk a total failure of the project. The plug could be pulled and cost could be written off, and you never get anywhere, you never get any revenue anyway. A buggy product is worth more than no product at all, and bugs never make production if the code never goes live. So at the MVP stage, if your funders are saying, we just want loads of features, we want it done on a really tight time scale, we want something out there, we want users on it making money, tests are the first thing that get dropped. Unless you're absolutely brilliant at it. But we're going to get to that. Hopefully we can get better at doing our tests. Next phase, as a product is growing, again, you might have some users, you might have some revenue coming in, but it is probably still negative. You might have the debts that you had from the initial investment, you might have new development costing more than the revenue that's coming in. So again, you're still in a situation where the main motivation is to get new features out. You want to keep customers, you want to bring customers. If your competition have more features than you need to get these features out there, get people using the application. And then again, lack of existing tests from the previous stage essentially starts to make testing a bigger challenge. You've got more to cover and more to build in. But on the plus side, the increasing risk of bugs due to continuous development and potentially the increase in the impact of bugs on your revenue does start to bring that motivation in. It's just you're in a situation where now you start wishing you'd been writing tests from the beginning. And then once you get to your established products, a lack of existing tests, legacy code, and often personnel who've moved on. When I say departed, I wasn't necessarily saying died, but you've got kind of knowledge is being lost, which again makes test writing a much larger challenge. You've got to review the code, you've got to re-understand what the product is doing in order to effectively write your tests. Again, on the plus side though, the commercial cost of bugs and errors is now becoming a significant factor. So if you've got one project I was working on, for example, had uptime SLAs with their clients. So they've got clients paying subscriptions, and these SLAs essentially were saying if there's any downtime, you owe us a refund on our subscriptions. So now we've got a real commercial motivation to make sure that any ongoing development doesn't introduce bugs, cause downtime. And again, refactoring for improved performance and reliability starts again to necessitate test coverage. Again, as you make those changes, any regression starts to really cost the company and the product for money. So to summarize the commercials, commercial incentives for testing are often lacking. So the benefits of testing are difficult to measure, and tests become increasingly costly to implement. But testing is a long-term investment. You need to treat it like any other long-term investment. You need to recognize the initial outlay and invest what you can. So, think about it like your pension. £100 a month starts to feel like, I could do with that extra £100 a month, but in 60 years' time, or maybe we won't be working for 60 years, but in 30 years' time, you might really regret not having put that investment in the first place. So you want to maximize your return on investment. So you want that £100 a month to grow as quickly as possible. or you want to minimize the amount of money you actually need to put in to get a return. And again, this is where maximizing the effect of your testing from the beginning starts to produce larger returns on investment. And then you want to make a habit of investing. So again, with your pension, you might have a standing order that goes out before your money even lands in your bank account. So you just have that rhythm and that habit of making sure that some investment is made in this in the first place. So how do we then apply this to our tests, to our projects, and resolve especially the conflict of getting tests in early without over-investing, wasting time that you could be spent building features and getting your project out? So I've experimented with a few different approaches to things, and one of the things that I find is actually really helpful is to get a framework not only for actually writing and running the test, writing and sort of handling the tests, but specifically to run them on a regular basis. So things like, well, first of all, a static analysis tool is great for this because it's almost free. You shove it in, it's going to at least tell you if you've got some issues with your code style, and that kind of gives you a prompt to look again at your code. But things like Git hooks, pre-commit and pre-push hooks, and your GitHub pipelines or Bitbucket pipelines, these things can be set up to ensure that tests get run at certain stages. So we can stop commits, pushes, and merges from going in if they're breaking tests. Now, okay, you might not have that many tests in there, but at least if you break tests that exist right from the beginning, that's in there, and that's a quick win from early on. Be selective. So you've really got to focus on what you're testing. There's no point in testing, let's say, Laravel's models, for example, because they're already tested. You know they work. They're in there from the framework. Cover your happy paths. Fill in your edge cases later, especially as you're finding bugs later on. You're fixing the bugs anyway. That's the point, to add, kind of coverage for potential failures, on top of the happy paths that you've put in early. They're a lot easier to write. Things like unit testing. Everyone says everything's got to be unit testing, but actually, if you've got end-to-end tests that are covering your endpoints, is it that necessary to cover the finer details in unit tests, at least from the beginning? So again, we're talking about going for the quick wins, getting a maximum return on your investment. You don't put as much time in, but at least you have something in there and it goes out. And then you don't get into that trap of, I've written a product, it's out there, there are no tests, we'll think about that later, and you've just got nothing to come back to. There's a really good section at the timestamp on this link here in quite an old talk now, but one of Adam Wathan's talks, Test-Driven Laravel, where he actually talks about choosing what to test, and he's talking about going through the logic of the application before you start writing it and picking what's easy to test. Don't bother testing your authentication, for example, because that's just too big a thing to take a bite of to begin with. Maybe just test, does your blog post appear first? And then pick the right tool. So again, as I said before, don't get bogged down in unit tests all the time. Unit tests can be tricky to actually get right because you're trying to isolate everything. You might be trying to mock things. You find yourself working hard on getting your tests properly isolated, when really you could just write an end-to-end test and say, I hit that endpoint, I give it an input, I get an output at the end of it. That's fine. It's easy to write. The point is, at these early stages, we just want to get something in there. And this applies to your growth and your established products as well. It's just a question of getting something in there and making sure it gets run again and again and again. And that gets you moving. So then on top of that, what more can we do? We'll practice writing tests. Of course, the better you get at it, the quicker you can do it. Therefore, the greater the benefit versus the cost. Make tests part of the planning phase. So if you start with a fully documented spec, in fact, I'll show you in a moment what we can do. If you've got a full, well-written API spec, then you know what you need to test, and we can make that a quick exercise. If you don't know what to test, maybe your tickets could do with better definition. So while you're going through planning and refinement, you're thinking, I don't know how I'm going to write a test for that. push it back to your team and say, well, can we have some better definition, please? And then the controversial subject, make use of AI. I'm finding ChatGPT is good at writing tests. Thing with AI, of course, we all know, don't just generate a bunch of code in AI, stick it in your application and expect it to work. But generating tests gives you a really good place to start. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. I'll come back to that point now. So I'm going to attempt a couple of live demos here. Bear with me if this doesn't go to plan, but let's see what we can do. So the first one, I'm just going to pull up a really simple code base I've been working on. It's written in Laravel 0, so it's essentially just a command that runs a script. The script, and let's not necessarily think too much on the merits of doing this, but the script just takes an SQL script and kind of minimizes it into a one-line thing, just so you could shove it through the MySQL program on a container. What I have in here, this is the script here. It's got a few methods that do the job we're looking for. To start with, I'm just going to show you very quickly how I've installed these Git hooks to make sure that your test analysis, your static analysis, and your tests are being run. I've just got a little script here that's just going to move these files into the .git/hooks directory in the repository. And when I install that, so I'm just going to run sh git hooks install. So we get our files copied over, scripts are complete. So now, if I were to write some not very well styled code, let's do that here. Check equals function. So we're going to get a complaint there where I return something. I'm going to get a complaint there where I've put all this on one line here. Let's put something in there. That should do the job. Right, and then so I'm going to add that. And we can see there it is in the diff. And then we're going to attempt to commit some poorly styled code. Poorly styled code. There we go. And then our Git hook runs and says, oh, hang on a minute, I want to check your code style here. So, okay, let's do that. Let's fix our code style. So we probably want a little space there. Bring this onto another line. Oops, making my code worse there. There we go. And then get a dot. And then so we're still, now we can see we fixed our style. Let's try again. Git commit. Some better style code. Style code. Fire that off. Passes. We're laughing. Now I want to push that up. Git push, and it fires off and goes to run my tests. And of course, it's going to fail. So let's just fix the tests now. In here, so we want inspire command. This is one of the tests that originally existed in there. And when I'm writing tests, sometimes I just don't really mind saying, you know what, I'd probably rather skip a test than do assert true. But in this case, I don't mind just getting that test working as in the easiest possible way. Now, if that were a test I was actually working on that feature, maybe that's lazy and we don't want to do that. But in this case, we're going to need to commit this. So you get a dot, git commit -m fix test. So style's good. Now we can push, and on GitHub. Oh dear. Oh yeah, of course, right. Assert true. Excuse me. That was trying to do a live demo there. And I now want to push, git push. There we go, and it should now run the test pass, great, and up we go. So things like that. I find with Git hooks, look, you can do -- no verify on there and skip that test. Actually, you have to install the Git hooks in the repository, so you might want to look at kind of building that in to your dev environment. But basically, your developers can work around that and turn off the Git hooks. But it's there more for yourself as a prompt, just to sort of say, don't forget, run the tests. Here we go, and you can see up go my few commits there. So that's one helpful thing. It builds that habit. I find that really useful. The next helpful thing is, let's say that I were to, reach for ChatGPT and ask what we can do with this class. So I actually set up a prompt already, so generate a prompt. I've asked GPT, please write me a set of unit tests using Laravel's testing framework for the following class. I've taken the entire class's code. Of course, be careful with posting code or anything into AI, because whatever you put in there becomes public, so no sensitive information goes in there. But this is a pretty simple class here. We're going to paste that in, and we're going to ask GPT to give us some tests. So where's my output here? Right, let it write that. Okay, looking at that, I mean, it looks reasonable as it's coming out there. So that equals, yeah. All right, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to ignore what GPT is actually telling me. Let's just see what happens if I dump the code into the test. So unit test here, SQL script test. So I'm just going to get rid of absolutely everything that's already in there. I'm going to drop that test straight in, and I am going to hope, I've lost my PHP tag there, test unit helpers. I don't see any red. Now, I would check this properly, but let's see. /vendor, then pest, run the tests. Okay, I get a failure. Failed to certain that two strings are equal. Update user's name, John. I've lost. Or maybe gained. Oh, I've gained a /n there, haven't I? It's a couple of /n's. That's not gone to plan. Live demo. But there you go. I mean, there's a test in there. The first time I did this, that test worked and just came out passed, and I checked through it and it was fine. But well, there you go. That's the thing though, with AI, check what it's given you. So now I need to actually work through that and make sure that what that test has given me back is doing what I think it's doing. Also just check that, yeah, okay, I didn't leave anything in the script there. So, you know, that's something. It's done half the work for me. I might want to actually take these /n's out here. Well, maybe that is perhaps where we've got that. I'm just going to see if it was that easy to fix that test again. Not quite. Okay. The other thing that we could do, let's assume we haven't written the class yet and we want to do it from a bit of a test-driven development approach. This time, let's see if this goes any better or worse here. I am going to generate tests from description. I'm going to take this prompt, and I've said to it, can you write me a test using the Laravel test framework for a class that takes an SQL script and has chainable methods and to do these things, interpolate some values, remove the comments, minimize the script into a single line. Let's pop that in GPT and see. Now, given that the one where I actually gave it the code has come out with a failure, should we expect any better from this one? I don't know, we'll find out. But I'll just let that finish generating and I'll dump it in. Let's see what happens. But, you know, while it's doing this, the point being is that I might spend half an hour writing that, or I might spend 5 minutes fixing what GPT's given me back. I don't know if I'd spend half an hour or an hour writing quite such a simple test class, but you know, it's saving a little bit of time. Copy code. Let's dump that in. So there's my test. Dump that in. Let's get my PHP. Oops. Question mark. PHP flag back there. So this one, I think straight away my class name is no SQL script. No, the class name's right. SQL script test. Oh, hang on. I'll tell you what we've done here. As I have copied. So this actually spits me out the class logic first. Let's just pop the test logic in there, test code in there. Oops, PHP. Right, app help. There's test your script test. Okay, let's just see how close this gets. Been passed. Okay. Again, we've got some spaces in here, but you know, you're close enough. It's getting out close to what you want. So it's a little bit of a tweak, and it saved us a bit of time. That's kind of the point here, is that play around with AI, see if it can save you some time. And the idea there being, maximize the tests you're getting out of the time you're putting in, get them in early, get the framework in for testing and running tests in early, and then all of these, you know, we don't have time to do the test, let's just get these features out, things like that. If you can start driving this stuff out first and minimize the time you're spending on it, later on you've got something in there at least, and then when that effort comes in and the tests become really valuable, you've got something to work with. I'm going to leave it there. I'm slightly disappointed by my failed attempts with AI there, but we knew that was going to be a risk from the beginning. So thanks for your time. Yes, yeah, please do.
When you're using AI to write your text / your code,
Yeah.
whose time are you saving?
Well, it depends. I mean, if I'm using AI to write my tests, the idea being that I can still achieve the goals I've set. So you've got the tickets, we've got some number of points on it. We're assuming there's some amount of time I need to spend doing that. And you've come across some complication somewhere that means that you're running out of time that you thought you had to do this stuff. And the first thing you end up leaving behind is your tests. And so if rather than spending an hour writing the test, if GPT is kicking me out something that I can spend 5 minutes tweaking, putting in and getting a test out of, then I'm saving my time, but it's time where I'm able to achieve the goals that have been set. And, you know, ultimately that's providing value to the project and you know, to my clients, my employers, whoever's.
See your client going, well, you can write this in GPT, therefore I'm giving you even less time because you can write stuff quicker.
Well, possibly. The beauty of it, really, though, is that the clients don't care about testing quite a lot. Very often, all they care about is that the features go out. The testing, really, we're doing because we want life to be easier later on when we come back to those tests. So many clients I've worked with, sort of, I've genuinely had clients say, well, what's the point in doing testing? Why should we put the time and the effort into getting tests working when for our end client, we can't tell them that we've actually done any good. We haven't produced new results. We haven't added new features. So when you've got a client whose attitude is, don't worry about the quality, don't worry about the test, just get the features out there, but make sure they work, it's down to you to decide how you're going to make sure they work. And if you can minimize the time and effort you put into writing testing, if AI is giving you good results, great, use AI. If it's not, okay, scrap that. Just write the test the usual way, but try to do it as quickly and efficiently as you can. And then you still get to achieve the result where you've got tests in there, you're happy with the quality of your work, you're confident that there's not going to be any bugs that go in front of the client and they get upset about that. And, you know, everybody wins. The client gets what they wanted, I get what I want in the code, and I have an increased level of confidence that there's not going to be something that comes back to bite me with regards to the bugs that go into code.
So I like the happy path concept, but I kind of feel like where it really saves clients money, or where it becomes worthwhile, is when you've got a complex domain model, and actually the happy path is something that someone's going to be struggling with, or has weird edge cases, and maybe it's like, you know, it's testing against the user role, but it's also testing against a feature set, and suddenly
Things get very complicated.
It becomes like you're writing the test is worse than writing the logic, but you realise the value. You realise the value in preserving that in the test. I just have no idea how to get there.
Well, this is okay. So this is I like the way you phrased the question in particular, because the key here is that if it's the business logic that is complicated, then it needs testing. In fact, there's a quote. I had it written down here. If code deserves to be written, it deserves to be tested. That was from a Way of Testivus. This was a strangely written book by one of Google's engineering directors, and it was kind of written as a bit of a kind of a mystic manuscript sort of thing. Point is, if it's your business logic, it needs to be tested. You need to be confident that it's working, and the more complicated it gets, the more time you probably ought to spend in writing the tests. When it gets complicated, how might you minimize the test effort? If you really can't, don't. If it absolutely needs all that effort put into it, then really at that point you've just got to fight with your commercials and say to them, well, look, it needs this time putting into testing, otherwise you're going to put out buggy code and you're going to have mistakes. If you can fight that battle from a commercial perspective, you might be telling your end clients, if you've got something out there that your clients are relying on, people paying the money are relying on, and it doesn't work the way you expect, what's that going to cost you? Therefore, is it worth putting whatever time the testing requires into doing it? And essentially at that point, you push the decision back onto them. Sometimes you'll get people who turn around and go, well, you're a developer, you write the code, if it works, it works, if it doesn't, it doesn't. And you sort of say, well, yeah, but the more complicated it gets, the more likely it is that I've missed something. I always talk about developer blindness. And when you write some code, you think, I've written that, it works. All the ways I've tested it, it's great, it works. But all the other ways that it could fail, I haven't approached those things, which is why ideally you have a good QA team. But if you don't have a good QA team, define the behaviors that you want first, lay them out in tests, write your code against that and make sure that you're at least achieving the behaviors you thought were in there. And then when something does go wrong, come back to it and write a test to cover those scenarios. If that takes time and you can't, do something like use AI to minimize that time, then that's a commercial battle you've got to fight.
I just wanted to say, to add on to that, one of my experiences is that companies have been reluctant to kind of let you write the test because of what you say, everything's going to be really complicated. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and that will take a lot of time, but at the same time I've had cases where we wrote very complicated code and then it fell over on like line 2. So and nobody put in the test because they thought it was going to be too complicated, right? So like just the most simple test of does this fall over, like does this return a 200 response or whatever, is better than nothing. So I would say there's kind of a halfway house.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the back of that though, if you are finding you aren't able to write a test for code, then your code is too complicated. That's the code smells straight away.
Yes.
And so even extracting into smaller methods, splitting in smaller testable chunks, approaching untested. I've worked with, I think the largest was like 7,000 lines we had 1.5% code coverage on a user model with 7,000 lines long. Because everybody had come in and just added bits on. Yeah. So it was like, well, add a new bit as a class, isolate that, get 100% code coverage on your new bit.
Absolutely.
And then at least you are able to take from the untestable part over. But obviously the whole thing about writing your test first that's why it's sort of about the GPT stuff.
Yeah.
If you are allowing your GPT, if you're qualifying that your GPT stuff is working how you're expecting, it's kind of...
Yeah, I certainly take your point. I suppose one of the things is that you still are the developer. You still have to say, I'm going to write this piece of code in this container. So, you know, this class, for example, the class we're working with here, it's a very limited responsibility. So we're, you know, coming back to our solid principles, you've got single responsibility for any class. And when I know what that one class and its methods need to do, then I can define that as a nice small chunk, chuck it into GPT and say, hey, GPT, focus on this very limited scope I'm giving you and come back with something for me as a start. I mean, again, what GPT's given me there, any one of us in this room could write that down in minutes, you know. Sorry? Yeah, exactly, yeah. It just does it that little bit quicker, and that's the thing. It's a gain where you could sit there and write 100 lines of code, or GPT could spit them out in a second, and then you can sit there and go, okay, cool. Has that met my assumptions? Do I need to make any changes? Now I can write that, but I've still designed this as a class, as a helper class, that then I'm using somewhere else in my, you know, in my command somewhere. That's down to me. You know, I'm not there asking GPT, tell you what, write this entire app for me, structure it well, you know, follow solid principles, doing things like that. That's too big an ask for GPT. If you can define what you want it to test, and it just does the legwork of writing the tests out and saves you 10 minutes, half an hour, a day, you know, the more it saves you, the better.
I think just as a sort of extra point to add to this, as well as saving money, I use GPT to write this type of test a lot.
Yeah.
I just find them really boring to write. I don't want to do it.
Absolutely.
And it's-
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think that's under.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, weirdly, I actually really enjoy writing tests. But you're absolutely right. You might find, you know,
Cool ones, but when it's just the like, you know, really, you know, that's a relatively simple class. You're just testing that it's chopping some strings up, and you know, you're basically spending all your time remembering how to use your test framework. You're not really thinking about your test at all.
absolutely.
When you're writing your test at that case, how do you know that your test is going to do the thing that you want it to do if you haven't got the test in front of the code that you're writing? Because I mean, I'm chopping classes up. My IDE gives me a red line, tell me I've got line breaks, I've got errors, so I can clean up as they go along.
Yeah.
But if I haven't defined what my expectation is going to be, either through assertions or through acceptance criteria, if you're doing end-to-end,
Yeah.
then how do you know you're done?
That's a good point. Well, the other point is that you've got to read what GPT gives you. You still have to know how to write a test. You've still got to read what it gives you, and you've still got to say, I asked you to write this test for me. I'm now going to read that. Does it look reasonable? I've not got any code to test that against. So, you know, basically, has GPT met my expectations? Do each of the test functions correctly test the functions I want to build in my class? And now when I run that and it's telling me, okay, this class doesn't exist. Okay, cool. I'll write the class. This method doesn't exist. And if you turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, I didn't ask for that method, then you want to read that closer again because GPT's obviously hallucinated something that you didn't want in there. So, you know, I'm definitely not saying, you know, just get AI to write all your tests. But, you know, as part of the exercise of getting the most value out of the time you spend in doing testing, explore AI, absolutely.
Have you written your tests and then asked AI to write the code?
I have not done that actually. That's an interesting approach. The reason I haven't explored that is because I just don't like relinquishing control to that level. I like to say, you know what, GPT, you do the test for me. I'll be responsible for the code. But that's a very good idea. I'll try that.
If you use a GPT API, you could say, I want some code that does this,
Yeah.
and it spits the code back. You put it through your test harness,
Yeah.
and then you can tell GPT, but it didn't work as of this, so you just keep iterating until...
Yeah. Well, that's
to spend a lot more money probably.
That's something I've recently been introduced to, this concept of actually iterating through AI and saying, okay, well, you've given me this result, it didn't work in this way, do it again, come back with something better. I haven't explored that kind of approach myself yet, only recently become aware of it. I feel, and this is only a feeling because I've got nothing to base this on, but I feel that I would get frustrated with that process before then turning around and just saying, you know what, it's quicker to write this test myself, I'm going to write the test myself. Is where I think I'd find myself there. Let's go ahead.
You're going to say, like, when you're in a position of knowing your requirements and passing it to something to write, that kind of moves you further up your role in your company. I mean, I've spent a long time being a contractor, so I empathise with a lot of what you've said. And as a contractor, you don't have the, I'm a middleweight, I'm a senior, I'm a lead. But when you get into that position, you can really relinquish the, I've got these expectations for this code. Produce me some code, let me critique it. You know, that is how a coding team works. So, I mean, it feels great to be able to do what you've suggested, to write the test first, get GPT to write the best implementation, because it's bound to, because it can go through all the manuals. You know, like possibly the you know, Larry on Larrycast, Larry AI has solved many problems for me. But also I've managed to bend it to not being able to solve the problem, but being able to ask the question in a way that you can iterate through. It helps you formalise the solution, and if you actually can't, if your question needs to be complicated, then it needs to be simpler, because the best code you can write is the smallest amount.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly an area to explore. Don't really have an answer to that other than absolutely explore it. That's kind of the idea behind the suggestion with AI in this testing here. Is it's a relatively new tool to all of us. It's something that, if it saves you time and maximizes the effect of the test you're writing, absolutely do it. Really, though, the key to the kind of overall approach is that just take whichever approach gets you the tests in there and achieve some coverage, especially at the earlier stages. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're going to release stuff in the best that it can be.
Yeah.
Have you done any, like, how good is it at spitting out not happy parts? Like, does it ever give you interesting edge cases? You're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought to write a test.
I haven't found it yet. But again, as I say, I mean, this is, I'm early in my journey with AI writing code for me. I still am in a scenario where I probably wouldn't trust it to come out with edge cases and things. I would be using it as a foundation and building on top of that. So it's certainly not something I've even tried to explore yet, but you know, definitely a good idea, something well worth looking to explore.
I was going to say, have you tried GitHub Copilot?
I haven't. We were talking about this before. I think, my opinion on that is that, again, this thing about relinquishing control. I feel that I hate autocorrect on text, things like that. I kind of feel like I'm much happier going into another environment and saying, produce something for me, looking at the result, assessing that, putting it back in, and then going back there if I need to. So I might find, because I haven't tried it yet, that CodePilot actually is the best thing since sliced bread. But no, I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, I had to get used to Copilot finishing the sentences for me.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Pretty good, I guess. I think we've probably got time for one more question, if you're up for it.
Yeah. More?
We got time for a little statement. I just always think how curious it is in our industry that we allow the client to be so controlling on how we do something rather than what we do. I mean, an example was an electrician. You would never say to an electrician, don't bother testing it, it's fine, we'll want to see it work. That'd be ludicrous. Or if I was getting my upstairs windows fitted, I wouldn't get the builder to climb up the wall and then put the scaffolding up afterwards.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, well, you're right. any client who tells you what you should and shouldn't be doing, yeah, absolutely. The issue though is more one of the motivation that you're, I suppose the pressures that you're experiencing while working on a product. So if a client doesn't care about testing and you can't convince them that they need to be doing testing, essentially you have to find the time to get that testing in there.
Talk about testing, do you? You talk about what you are shipping.
Exactly.
They don't care about the test, so why make it a part of the conversation?
Exactly. And the difficulty comes though where you're asking clients for more time in order to do testing. And so the kind of general thrust of the talk here is kind of find ways to put less time into testing, whether that's AI or whether that's practicing getting better at. The idea is if you can put less effort into testing and get the same or even better results out, that's a win for everybody.
Less time into the job. We don't, in where we work, we don't have time for writing tests.
Yeah.
It is, we did,
Yeah.
but we don't. It's part of the job.
Absolutely.
So there isn't so if anything, spend more time writing tests and less time writing code, because then you ship the smallest amount of code passes the test and you've got more test coverage.
Have you
That's
ever
the concept.
tried showing a client a screen of 7 green lines and 4 red ones? I'm done, don't panic.
Yeah, just take the test out, don't you? It's fine. Test and fine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Cheers.